Maybe I've had too much coffee. So I think we want to start with Silvia as our guest expert. Let's hear what you have to say. We'll comment, and then we'll kind of move to a more general discussion of what's happened in the Dropbox and the wiki. Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, very good. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation, and I haven't been able to really follow. I've been going around a lot, traveling, and so I haven't been able to follow up, what you guys have done in previous week. But I can speak to the theme of this session, which is women as vanguard. I have a reaction to the word vanguard. And I think enough of vanguards. But I understand as maybe leadership maybe is better, but the notion of vanguard has such an historically heavy context, because in the whole Leninist tradition, the vanguard had a consciousness that the others do not have, right? In other words, but I understand. Anyway, so I want to sketch out the reason why I think that women, well, it's not just my view. I think wherever I go, this view is shared. Women today are leading the struggles. And it has to do with many factors, but one in particular, I think one in particular is that, women in many parts of the world, more and more are recognizing that the central terrain of their struggle is the question of reproduction. And that all the various activities that go into what we call reproduction as a general concept, and then I will get much more concrete, right? That all these activity in a way are fundamental both for the reproduction of the system, which makes it important to struggle on this terrain, but they're also fundamental for the reproduction of the struggle. That in other words, the issue of reproduction has long been ignored by male-dominated organizations, but is actually very, very important. If you don't have a good reproductive system, chances are that your struggle will not be able to survive. Chances are that your struggle will not be able to grow. And that kind of traditional separation between the political and the reproductive, I wouldn't even call it personal, I'd call it reproductive. The sphere of the reproduction of life, from the political moment, the demonstration, the meeting, and so on, that separation has been extremely detrimental to the ability of organizations to grow, etc. So that's what I want to talk to first, and then I want to talk to some very specific example today, particularly coming from Latin America, but not only from Latin America, because I think that this question of women leading the struggle is really very, very, very general. And some words about reproduction as a general context and the theories that have been built around it. I think it's generally recognized that it was the feminist movement that really opened up the whole issue and area of reproduction as a terrain of struggle and social transformation of everyday life, but also transformation of systemic transformation. And originally, the concept itself, as most concepts, has changed, and has changed enormously in the way it is politically used over the last 40 years. It begins with signifying procreation, sexuality, because the women's movement, begins first as a struggle against for abortion, right? This was one of the first areas of activism. So it begins with the question of procreation, then grows into the whole issue of housework, We, for example, and I mean the campaign for wages for housework that we had, you know, between 1972 and 1977, right? We began to speak of reproduction in a different way, saying it's not only procreation, it's not only sexuality, it's the whole area of activities, including domestic work that reproduce our life, but at the same time, in capitalism, have been appropriated by the state and capital and have been subsumed to the reproduction of the workforce. So we began a whole new area of analysis, you know, challenging the idea of the separation between the private and the public, and the idea that all this sphere of reproduction was separate from capitalist accumulation. In fact, we said it is the pillar of capitalist accumulation.
Right.
What the home is the factory where labor power is reproduced. You know, it's the place. So we have two assembly lines, one producing workers, and then the assembly line where the workers are producing for the market. But this, in a way, reproduction is the reproduction of the workforce. And this is why, you know, domestic work is such a drudgery. This is why, not because reproducing people is not a creative job, but because in capitalism it's been organized in a very, very oppressive way, beginning with the isolation of women, the isolation of those who perform the job. So you're all, you know, divided up. So we began to see, for instance, how important it has been for the capitalist class to disaggregate people in the reproduction process. You know, capitalism brings people together in the factories, in the so-called workplace, but separates them, you know, and there's been a lot of science going into it. There's been a lot of capitalist thinking going into that isolation. I mean, the whole suburbia, Levittown, after the war, was a massive, massive process of disintegration, disaccumulation of the workforce in the reproduction process. So the people, the moment they stopped working, would not be able to congregate, would not share anything in the space outside of the factory, but they would just move away and go to places where they'll be highly isolated and where life will be organized in a totally hierarchical way. The family is a big hierarchy. The family, it's, you know, it's a place of great division. It seems a place where men and women are brought together, but it's actually a place where they brought together in a way that also divides them. You know, the man has the power of the wage, and through that power, he represents the state in the family. You know, he really is the state and capital in the family. He has the power to overlook, supervise women's work. He has the power to punish women, at least traditionally, right? He has the power to punish women if they don't comply. Domestic violence has been part of housework. The state has accepted domestic violence because they understand that if you want to discipline, you know, a labor force that is not waged, the unwaged are always disciplined with violence. So violence, women have recognized that it's not an accident. The violence, domestic violence, is so pervasive and is so tolerated and is always latent. There's always the possibility of violence. In other words, one of the first things you understand as a child and also as a wife, your husband can always give you a slap. And it's never going to be considered a crime. It's never going to be considered an abuse of power, a lack of disrespect of your body, right? Many times it's considered a sign of affection. I'm doing it for your own good. Yeah, this is the kind of, yeah, so we began to unravel and see that reproduction is actually one of the first places where the working class is captured. It's captured into the system. It's molded. You know, it's very strategically important. Important because it reproduces the energies, the labor power, the power to work, the capacity to work is not a given. Marx recognizes it. He has an incredible chapter, chapter 23, on simple reproduction, where he describes the fact that you have to produce the capacity to work. But he describes it in a way that is totally ignorant of women's work. He's saying, well, workers get the wages, they go to buy things, and they reproduce themselves their way. There's no work involved. So we recognize that work, the strategic element of it, you know, and so housework begins to be more and more integrated, domestic work, into the process of reproduction. Then come the 1980s. For me, the 1980s, even personally, was brought, you know, 3 years of living in Nigeria, where I began to discover, you know, the issue of land, which in Europe and the States too, the land was something distant. It was always the factory. And I realized that for many women, you know, reproduction began doing some agricultural work, subsistence agriculture. In fact, Africa until the 70s was the continent where subsistence agriculture was producing 70% of the food. 70% of the food eaten on the African continent until actually the early 80s was produced by women, not commercially, you know, in subsistence agriculture. Yes, you may sell some food, some oranges, some bananas at the side of the road, but that's not commercial. That's selling the little extra that your family is not using. That's not the big chain of supermarket. That's not, you know, it's a different kind of market. It's like market as it used to be understood in the pre-capitalist era. You know, it's the market among people who still have access to the land. It's market among people who still have access to the land, which changes completely the notion of marketing. Changes completely. In fact, some people say today that we don't have a market society because market had a different conception in a pre-capitalist world. So to me, and then the ecofeminist movement began with the question of the environment, you know, and then we began to understand the reproduction, the notion of reproduction began to expand. And when we speak of reproduction, of the workforce, reproduction of life, we're speaking of something that is very broad, that goes from giving birth, making love, or selling sex on the street or in hotels, and to domestic work of all types, and, you know, subsistence agriculture, you know, the care of the environment, you know, the cleaning up of all the places and so on, right? And we began to see that this is extremely crucial, that the struggle, and that women more and more have been making struggle on all these areas. And they've been in the forefront of the struggles in this area. And this has become more and more true, not only because of the extension of feminist movement, but also out of sheer necessities. You know, what has been happening in the 80s and 90s in particular, since the early 90s, first with the process of structural adjustment, you know, the imposition of massive austerity programs across the former colonial world. You know, I would call it the third world, but some people object to the notion. Although originally third world was not a derogatory concept. It was a concept that came out of the Bandung Conference, you know, of '57. And it simply meant the non-aligned world. It simply meant those newly independent countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America who did not align with Europe or with Russia or with the United States. That was originally the concept of the third world. But today, many people see it as derogatory. So I'm not going to use third world, I'm going to use former colonial world. So we have structural adjustment, massive austerity program, people cannot survive, the beginning of migration, migration across ocean, or migration as urbanization. People are forced to urbanize. The 90s, transnational companies, particularly the energetic sectors, mining, oil, etc., they come down on Africa, Latin America. This is what is happening now, what they call the politics of extractivism. So you have massive, you have the new primitive accumulation. You have millions and millions of people who, because of austerity, or because their lands are being taken over and they're being displaced, have to move, have to leave their ancestral land, and there's a huge struggle. There is migration, urbanization, diaspora, and there is a life-to-death struggle. Millions of people have been, involved in what I think is one of the most important struggles today on the planet: the struggle against the destruction of the commons, against their destruction through privatization and through mining, through poisoning, because they're poisoning the earth, they're poisoning the seas, they're poisoning the air. And this is now, we can go in a lot of detail. I just came back from Paraguay. I was in Costa Rica, in Paraguay. And this year I've also been traveling in other parts. I was recently in Ecuador. This is what everybody's talking about. The struggles that people are talking about, these are the struggles. Women organization from the Amazonia, against, leave the petroleum in the ground. Women from the coastal area fighting against aquaculture, which is destroying the coastal area of India, of many parts of the world. Women from different parts of Mexico and Guatemala fighting against the building of hydroelectric plants, new highways, and so on. And, fighting against their life that's becoming unlivable. It's really becoming unlivable. I can go in a lot of details with this. I mean, my eyes are full of images that I can, anyway. So the struggle against extractivism, the struggle to keep your land, against the poisoning, it's mostly women. It's really, so slowly you begin to see the women are in the foreground. And they are in the foreground for different reasons. Usually, it's the men who migrate. So there's a lot more women who are left in the towns, in the rural areas, as well as in the town. Women are migrating too, to become domestic workers, sex workers, or nurses. These are like the three big forms of employment for women who are migrating. However, still, it's mostly the men and young men who are migrating. So a lot of the people who remain at the village are women. Second, a lot of the young men are attracted by the prospect of wages. And there is a fierce struggle now, not only between the company, the transnational company, and the people about mining, but within the communities itself, between men, mostly the younger men, and the women. Because the younger men who are unemployed, who have no power, see the coming of a petroleum company who is giving a certain amount of, pretty decent wages, or decent compared to nothing. They see it as attractive. They have money in their pocket. They can go out and drink. The job is hard. They get drunk. They immediately, when the mining company comes, the number of women congregate as prostitutes. So they have women, they have money, they have this. Most of the women are against it. They have a longer view. They're dealing with children, they're dealing with food, they're dealing with people who are sick, and they understand that 10 years down the line, the land is poisoned, the cultivations are dead, people have to leave. They see it in the long term, so because of this commitment to reproduction, they really are the ones who are in the front line for the struggle. And it's not an accident that today, for instance, across Latin America, and not only Latin America, but Latin America in particular, women are the target of an amazing violence. In fact, there's been a huge surge in violence, hand in hand with structural adjustment, and particularly with the politics of extractivism. In Africa too, by the way, in Africa there is now a return of witch hunting. So we are talking about dozens and dozens of women have been killed in Africa through new forms of witch hunting. They have been burnt alive, buried alive, and we're talking about dozens of women. I'll talk about that later. In Latin America, women are really guiding the struggle in the rural area. And they're keeping the community together. They are the ones who are saying, keep the oil in the ground. Like in Ecuador, the women from the Amazonia, often battling with men in their community. I'm not saying that all the men are for the mining, but there is a lot of gender. And they understand that mining activities not only undermine, the ecosystem, they also bring violence, gender-based violence. The men get drunk and they beat up their wives, etc., etc. So there's now what is growing in Latin America, talking about Vanguard. What is growing is network of women, campesinas in particular, and indigenous. Although the distinction, it's a bit fictional, because indigenous are also campesinas. No? But indigenous campesina and their network, who are fighting with a very clear understanding that fighting against patriarchalism, against capitalism, and for the preservation of the ecosystem is one and the same fight. That you cannot separate the three. They have a very good understanding. Capital and, that this is one struggle. These are different dimensions of the same struggle, because capitalism, destroys the ecosystem as well as destroying people's labor, and also generates division, generates hierarchy, division, that are poisoning the community as much as the land is being poisoned. Oh. So, yeah, and that's why I think they are so important. But there is a further element that I think is so crucial. And this is where the question of reproduction, not only in terms of survival of the community, but also in terms of strengthening the struggle. For instance, just to give a simple example, but it's symbolic. Over and over, one form of struggle the women, say, in Ecuador have used has been to go these long marches from, say, the Amazonia to Quito, right? These are marches of thousands and thousands, maybe, people with the children the last 2 weeks or more. And similar to the marches the women in India have made, to go and protest against in the Narmada Valley, against the construction of dams. Now, women know how to organize them. Yeah, women organize, you need a whole infrastructure. Struggles need infrastructures, reproductive infrastructure. How do you feed people marching for 3 weeks? Where do they sleep? The children, what do you do with the children? I mean, another good example is what women organize, indigenous women organize, to fight around the Dakota Access pipeline, right? You know, they organized the 7,000 people. It was mostly the women who created the infrastructure, the food, the cooking, the provisioning, the schooling for the children, etc., because that all, well, the whole experience of knowing what it means to bring another day, to allow people, you know, to feed, to care, etc. So I think that's becoming very, very important in the struggle. You know, traditionally you've seen struggle, they go up and down. There's a high moment, you know, everybody's excited, and then boom, and it seems to be disappear. I think there is a new way of organizing that is building, that is constructing, that because it's really changing, you know, in a very powerful way, the relation among people, the social tissue, you know, that is keeping the struggle together. It's creating new forms of organization. And it's not easy to keep this form of organization that are built in the struggle always over the long term. An example, the whole example of the MST, the landless people of Brazil, you know, the Movement Sem Terra, the landless people of Brazil. They have fought long, many years, and they have recuperated thousands and thousands of acres of land. During the struggle, they had a totally communal form of organizing. People, men and women, cooked together. There was really a commoning experience due to the necessities of the struggle. People lived together, shared everything, and did reproductive work together. You win the land, and then many men wanted to build houses separate from each other. Right? Say, okay, now I have my farm here, I'll build my farm there. So the women in many places struggled, in many places lost. In some places were able to. They said, no, let's stay together so that we can continue to do reproductive work together. And we can also support each other, right? So this is what I've been, you know, very, very interested in, how this, the struggle is transforming. The struggle is not only resistance against, right? It's not only an oppositional struggle, but it's also a constructive one. The struggle is also transforming relation. And it's building, it's breaking down the wall, it's breaking down the isolation in which women have fought and lived. And it's giving more power to everybody. And the same has taken place in the urban area. There's a whole story in Latin America, from Chile through Peru, through Argentina 2000 with the movement of the piqueteras, you know, who were bringing their cooking pots to the street, and they organized their reproduction in the streets. They organized the barrial assemblies, the community assemblies to make decisions. So there's a whole experience that is, and what you see in the villas miseria, you know, like Retiro Bis, where women are managing the streets, they're building different kinds of things together. And that kind of transformation, I think, is extremely important. And a lot of people are now recognizing that. I don't know, there's the work of Raquel Gutierrez about the water wars in Bolivia. There is the work of Raúl Zibeki, who speaks of societies in movement. Latin America is a place not of social movements. Social movements still mean separation from society. He's speaking of societies in movement. And he's thinking precisely of the women. And this kind of you know, collectivization of reproduction, socialization of reproduction, you know, the urban garden, the comedores populares, the popular kitchen that are serving hundreds and hundreds of meals every day, collectively, where women work collectively, also with young men, you know, not in isolation, taking turns, Monday group of women, Tuesday another group of women. So there is a transformation that is taking place in the communities, right? In some cases, it might peter down, but in many, many cases, it's really changing the way people are thinking and the way people are living. And I see that this is the direction in which you know, we should be moving. And I think that this is why women today are so much in the target of narco traffickers, the police, etc. This violence, it's a violence that is very connected to the new forms of capitalist accumulation, to the new places where women have to go to make a living, you know, more and more out in the street, right? But it's also a violence that is directed at destroying, you know, a transformation that is taking place. And what I see as a revolutionary transformation that is taking place, and that it's really headed by women, you know. So I'll stop here now, and then maybe we can go, you know, hear some response, and we can move from here.
That was wonderful, Silvia. Thank you so much. We're going to pause for 1 minute on ours because we're having trouble plugging things in, which is why
Sure.
So, hi, everybody. If you can give us 30 seconds to get our juices, literally our juices flowing. Think about questions and comments. That is not working.
So just unplug it. Yours,
and I'm going to get more clothes because it's cold in this apartment.
What is this going to? Anything important? This. Okay. Plug into this.
Oh, we added that already.
Yeah, plug into that one. And then I'll plug mine into the wall jack.
Right.
And vice versa. Here.
That's fine, right?
No, that's one of the two.
Come on, there's no that.
No, this is yours.
Okay.
So mine is down to the very bottom. That's fine. Just leave it. That's fine.
Okay, good.
It's
Now
working.
plug mine in over here.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, everyone's plugged in their
So
computers.
You got all of that down. Huh?
We are.
Okay.
We are in power. We are powered.
Okay. We
Oh,
are
good.
Hi,
People.
we're back, everybody. And welcome to folks who joined us sort of recently. So yeah, I think we should let's spend a good amount of time on this because we can table stuff that's on the wiki and the Dropbox is there. We can table that, but anyone who's got a burning comment or question for Silvia or inspired by,
or share experiences that you have, because I'm confident that this kind of things is happening not only in Latin America. I think Latin America, because, well, actually I can add, you know, because I've spoken a lot about Latin America, but something very similar is also happening in Africa. For example, one phenomenon that has happened in Africa over the last 30 years has been that women were being forced out of the towns, you know, forced out of the rural area for the same reason, right? Even more, Africa probably was the first region that was and came under attack. Africa now is under attack of mining companies, probably being the most rich continent of minerals, strategic, what they call strategic mineral in the world, right? Second, is under attack by agribusiness. Third, you have countries like Saudi Arabia, who's buying up Africa now. They've bought up huge, huge areas of land in Ethiopia, and they're now buying in other countries as well. So then you have the gasolina verde, the green gasoline. So green capitalism is built on the expropriation of thousands of hectares of land to plant, elephant's leaves, which they use to make green fuel. So we have to be very careful, because there's a whole struggle across the world against green capitalism, which is really built on the expropriation of people and the destruction of many commons. Like Latin America and Africa, these are the two parts of the world where communal regimes of land property have survived until recent years, have survived until the 60s. In Latin America, you still have many communal systems. Some new, like the Zapatistas, and some old. Same in Africa. You still have a lot of communal systems. So there is a massive, massive, massive attack. And that is taking place also with war. A lot of the wars in Africa are wars that are, sometimes they appear, I'm sorry, I have a phone call. Dogs, take that away. Take that away. Take that away.
Woman in church.
Yeah. So, you go to another room first. Thanks. So, what has been happening, people are being expelled, and the women, when they go into town, they have been taking over any piece of land that was not, used in the public area, along train tracks, in schools, in any piece of land that was not used, they start planting. They start putting their crops, and then taking care that people are not taking away the crop. The police doesn't destroy. So there is a whole literature saying that in Africa, the distinction between town and country is actually being undermined, because women are breaking down that distinction. They are turning African capitals, like Kinshasa, into urban gardens. That's also another big change that is happening, which I think is really very, very interesting, right? So, and of course, as I was saying before, in Africa too, the attack against women, particularly older women who are holding on to the commons, who are holding on to not selling the trees, not selling the cow, not putting the land on the market, and I think that's a lot of what the new witch hunts are about. So you have often younger people, unemployed, right, who probably, hired by local chiefs who are in complicity with transnational corporation or with national corporation, right? They ambush women and accuse them of being witches, kill them, and then appropriate the land, right? And then the land, of course, is gone. So there's a whole thing about accusing women, older women, of being witches that is connected clearly with this transformation that is taking place, in the land. The attack on the commons, the commercialization of large areas of land, the creation of game parks. So they've noted that the number of attacks on women, with the charge of witchcraft, is much higher in the areas where the land is being commercialized. And often these young people, who go at night, tie them up and and burn them alive, or machete them to pieces, right? Yeah, you should go. It's on the internet. Nobody's paying attention. I've done some work. I wrote things. You can get the things I wrote about this on the internet. I wrote a piece already years ago, and I'm still working on it. It's amazing. We're talking about, the last that I checked, it was about 30,000 women who have been killed. And and in Tanzania in 2013, 7,000 women were killed in Tanzania in 2013, mostly burnt alive and buried alive. Go to there, see what they've done in the Central African Republic. I mean, there's a whole, in Ghana, they have camps of concentration for witches. In the north of Ghana, you can look it on the internet, concentration camp for women accused of witches. This is very, very, very connected with the whole issue of land, you know, with the whole issue of land, because the land is also becoming more and more unavailable with all these vultures descending upon it, you know, from mining to green gasoline, etc. And so in the communal regimes, you know, the men are also trying to rewrite the protocol as to who belongs and who doesn't belong. And there is now a push in Africa, in India, to even in the communal regime that are surviving, to force women out of the land. This is what is happening. And by the way, there is also a big struggle in the communal regime against the patriarchalism. Women are now fighting within the communal regime in Africa and in Latin America against the patriarchalism of these some of these communal regimes, you know. And there's a whole story in Latin America, very, very interesting, in Guatemala, you know, because the struggle is, how do you struggle against the communal regime without demanding privatization? Mm-hmm. How do you change the communal regime so that actually women have access to the assemblies, to the decision making, to the transmission of land, which is not always there. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And we know the struggle the women have made in the Zapatista communities, also to force men not to drink, which is very important. Right? So this is the landscape. This is the landscape, is a landscape of yeah, and I'm really emphasizing the question of women in the former colonial world, because I think it's one of the most important struggles, but we can move also away from that. But both in Africa and Latin America, I think that the struggle over land, forests, you know, waters, you can really say that the women are really central to it. They're also central to the struggle. For instance, in India, there's a new fishermen movement. In fact, it's not called fishermen anymore. It's called fish person movement, because women more and more are actually taking a lead. You know, they don't go out to sea, but they are the ones who are fighting against the aquaculture, and also they're fighting against the big companies taking over the selling of the fish and the big boats, and you know, they're keeping the context between those who remain on the land, those who go out at sea, you know. And so, yeah, this, I'll stop here again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, as you were speaking, Silvia, I was thinking about the philosophy of white supremacy, which, you know, one of capitalism's greatest accomplishments was creating levels of power, so that there's relative power between people who have relatively little power, right? And so the night watchmen were invented after, you know, an instance of poor whites and former indentured servants and black slaves organizing together. So the night watchmen, which became like the Ku Klux Klan later, you know, they're invented to say, well, yes, you have it pretty bad, but you can go lynch one of them black guys every now and then and feel better about yourself. And so the idea of, you know, that's the genius of patriarchy. Every man, no matter how poor, no matter how powerless, he can rape some bitch.
Yeah.
He can be his wife. And he owns the children.
That.
And he can sell them or kill them or eat them or do whatever he wants with them. So there's always this I mean, I think that's what we're feeling as women with relative power are confronting the remnants of their enslavement,
Mm-hmm.
right? And women with relatively less power, you know, are in that position. And, you know, I think that's, I mean, as you started, I don't think there is capitalism without the enslavement of women. Yes. It's impossible. I mean, the whole thing sort of rests, or there are two pillars, you know, one, maybe neither can exist without the other.
Mm-hmm.
But really it's about ownership. I love what you said about the processes of reproduction, but then also who owns the fruits of the labor, right? Literally, like, we have labor and a thing, this commodity, this person comes out, and who owns that person. And I think that
and now the selling of children in surrogacy, the selling of children, the fact they have created a market where children can be bought and sold in surrogacy. You know, it's really back to the situation that you had in under slavery, for example, in colonies like Virginia, where they had a breeding industry. We still have a breeding industry. In India, for instance, now they have all these clinics where women go purely to breed children for the rich. Yeah. They're better off. They go there, they get inseminated, they wait 9 months, then the people come, they get the child, they give them some money. That's the difference with slavery. They give them some money, and then they go home, and they never hear. And many women, they are convinced they do it. You know, I've been reading a lot about this recently. They do it not only for the money. The money is important. They do it because they think that they are building families. They think they're building families with the family that takes the child, you know, and that they are entering into a better world by connecting with these people who have resources. Right. They get shocked and traumatized when these people, once they got the child in their hands, nothing to do with it, they disappear. And they never hear from them again. And there's a whole story of women feeling like they have been really betrayed. Yeah. And I think I'm a little bit rambling because it's so emotional. But I think there's something about the power inherent in the female body that is terrifying. I mean, I think we need to talk about male fear, and I want to be very clear that I'm excluding the individuals who are part of this conversation. You know, this is not. I'm gonna let's say. You're not scaring me, yeah. I'm gonna say male or men in a sort of political collective version, not as in everybody. So, but it's a shoe fits. I think, but I think like, you know, as you know, animal husbandry and agriculture and all these things come, and we start to understand reproduction in itself. The female body is miraculous. It's an amazing. Look, everybody in this earth, everybody on this earth has come out of our body. Everybody who has lived on this earth has come out of a woman's body. Right. So now that's something, right? Exactly. I mean, there's this sort of magic of like hosting more than one organism at the same time, right? You move from like one organism to like multiple life forms existing in the same organism. Let's not absorb multi-orgasmic as well, which can also make someone terrified and jealous. So there's something about the, you know, we have to think about the terror. The fear, the feeling of inadequacy that drives this lust to, you know, this control. It's all about, I want to take control of this thing that scares me, that I'm jealous of, that I don't have. And it's an amazing wealth that can be exploited. It's an amazing wealth. Without that wealth, no capitalism, no power, no nothing. That's right. You know, we're frozen. Anyway, that's my rant. Yeah. Who else wants to rant? What's next?
Lola has to leave.
Lola, yes. Lola, I know you have to head out. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it was very interesting, and like it really opened, like what you said, Sylvia. It really opened my mind to new forms of women's like struggles, and I didn't know that because I think the messages that we get from like the media and everything, we completely like put aside the role of women in many struggles, in many aspects of life, and we just, I don't know, it's so it put women back in a place where she's not, like, we're not always like heard of. So it was very, I really appreciated that, so thank you. And I really like what you said, Jenny, about the will of control, and that's, I think we talked about this in psychology once. I think I remember that, like the feeling that we can like actually, yeah, like give birth to people, and that men don't have that power. And like, for example, we are the only one who can be sure that we're actually the mothers of the kids, and the men can never have that certainty. I mean, we can do tests and stuff like this, but it's different. So I think there is something about maybe some form of unconscious, yeah, maybe envy or something like that. That's definitely part of the reasons why there is also some violence against women.
And I see a lot of the new reproductive technology as a form of violence too. You know, I know that they give certain options to certain women, and for a limited number of women has been an option to become mother when they couldn't become mother, or gay couples, etc. But when you look at it from the point of view of the majority, the new technology has been really a massive form of violence, because first of all, has opened up a whole market in human parts, women's parts. So now, for example, there's a whole market. The impoverished women of the world not only are selling their children, they're also selling their eggs. It's a huge market of eggs, which is very, very painful. And sometimes women, to be able to sell more of their eggs, I mean, are you aware there's a whole market in Eastern Europe, in Greece, for instance? Women are selling, and in order to sell more, you also take hormones. And the process of extraction of eggs is very painful, you know. So that's what women do in order to get some money, you know. And also, there's a big market in placentas, which doctors are now feeding to companies, cosmetic companies, pharmaceutical companies. They don't tell the women when they go to give birth that their placentas have a lot of value, but they are selling. There's a huge market. And so people think that the medicalization, they want women to give birth in hospital, and they're so against, you know, midwives. Also because that way they can take over the placenta, which is now a big market with pharmaceutical companies, because they are recognizing that the placenta has a lot of properties for regenerative therapy. So there's a whole branch of medicine, the regenerative therapy, that is built on women's placentas, you know, which is rich in substances. You know, there's a woman from Australia, Melinda Cooper, she's writing about that. But this is a whole thing. And then, of course, the sale of children. You know, these women who are now, so the whole field of new reproductive technologies, and connected with this, the technology is never separate from ideology. There's a new conception of what it means to be a mother. So mothering now, there's a new notion of the gestating mother. The gestating mother is the idea of a woman's body with just a container. It's not creative. She doesn't give anything to the child. The only creative part is the proprietors of the DNA. The proprietors of this thing, the DNA. You put it in and the child is yours. The woman doesn't do anything. She's just an empty box. And reality is false. And it's very bad, because what is happening is that, on the contrary, in the 9 months, you know, the mother has a very, very powerful, formative role. So 3 months into gestation, the child knows the voice of the mother. The child is so much part of the mother that 3 months after, he knows or she knows her voice, right? The body of the mother goes into the body of the child, you know? As soon as the child is born, I mean, it's so miraculous that when the child is born, the child knows immediately in the weeks before the birth, a whole set of hormonal changes are taking place on both bodies. That when the child comes out, he or she knows what to do. And for weeks, I didn't know this until recently. For weeks, the milk of the mother changes depending on the saliva of the child.
Yeah.
The saliva of the child tells the mother what the child is needing.
Yeah.
So the milk change. Can you imagine? So turns out that when the child is separated, you know, in a surrogacy, the child is given away. Many children cry for weeks. They cannot sleep. It's so traumatic to lose completely the contact with that body that they've been connected with for 9 months. They've been created by the body. That the separation, it's a violent process. They never talk about it. I read stories and stories, because I've done, of children who couldn't sleep, and they had to go back to the mother, and for the time the child slept. You know, children couldn't sleep after they were separated. You know, so this is the power. And I think I say always that the woman's body is capitalism's last frontier.
Yeah.
They really want to learn to possess that power. They want to create life outside of the woman's body. They want to be able to push women aside and to, you know, they've been trying. The church has been trying to appropriate mothering. You know, some people say that the reason why the priests wear long skirts instead of pants is because they kind of want to give the idea that they are women. I mean, there's a whole woman, there's a beautiful book that an Irish woman has written about the role of the church in Ireland when they went there, you know, and they were fighting with women trying to present themselves as the life givers. They encountered a very matriarchal world, and to counter this matriarchal world, they began to set up places for children, and they began to present themselves as the real life givers. And it was a competition about creativity and life-giving, you know? And so the suggestion about the robing, the dressing, you know, appropriating the female look. So, you know, capital is trying to do the same, appropriating that power. So all these experiments with test tube baby. I think we should fight against the notion of test tube baby. There's no test tube baby. It's put in our hand the idea that children are made outside of women's body. They are not. There's no test tube babies. Babies come out of women's bodies. Very simple.
I also wanted to add, I also just wanted to add quickly in terms of the surrogacy and the eggs, because I've had friends in New York City, actresses who've done this, is the racial component as well, and whose eggs are worth more. So blonde hair, blue-eyed women from America or Eastern Europe or Scandinavia with college degrees, their eggs are worth more. So of course that's all combined. I just want to sneak, Lola, do you have anything else that you wanted to add, and then we should open it up here?
Well, yeah, just one last thing that I saw on the internet, that they started to like it was not for human beings. I think it was for, I don't remember, sheeps or something like that, and they created it like sort of outside of the
yes, the famous, yes.
Yeah, so that was like, they say it's going to be great for human beings like who were born too early, but I just see it as the scariest thing ever, that they're going to just try to get rid of women for like giving like, creating children. So.
Yeah, and there's a whole eugenic program connected with the new technology. It's really very much the old eugenic program, right? That is also like the sperm bank. You know, what you were saying before about the racism of the sperm bank. It's amazing. So the sperm of white college people, it's valued so much more, right, than the sperm of a black person or a person without a degree. So you really find a whole spectrum of racism that passes through this new reproductive technology that are supposed to be so liberating and, you know, so emancipating of women and men.
Sam, you've written, and David as well, some, you know, adding into the chat.
I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Silvia, and thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Did you guys want to?
Oops, too late.
Sam, you're on, I think, if you want to be on.
I'm on?
You're on.
Okay, yeah, I keep thinking back to this idea of cheap nature, right? That the point of capitalism is to appropriate and to capitalize cheap nature. And so cheap gestation is a category.
Yes.
Gestation. I mean, you know, this appears in utopian fantasies. So, for instance, you have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, where, you know, they create a human being without a woman, and the inhabitants of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World all come from test tubes, right? Or at least this is the perverse fantasy that Huxley is parodying. I mean, you know, the book originally being a parody of H.G. Wells' Men Like Gods, and so yeah, it's just kind of curious that these women, right, have decided that they're still going to have a society, whereas the overwhelming trend throughout the world is to cheapen everything, to cheapen the land so that we can extract cobalt from it for all these nice little computer devices we're using to have this conversation right now, to you know, to cheapen agriculture so that, you know, the food from the land can be exported, and you know, the farm workers can work themselves to death, and that sort of thing.
And the GM and the genetically modified, yeah.
Right. So, what sort of internet presence do these women's sort of social salvage, I mean, is what it sounds like you're describing, Silvia? What sort of internet presence do they have?
Oh, I think a lot, but you know, it varies, because there are different levels of organization, right? So, for instance, you know, I just talked about Latin America. Across Latin America, you have, you know, very sizable women's organizations that are fighting around feminist issue, the environment. Let's say in Ecuador, organization like Acción Ecológica. There's also some men working with them, but it's predominantly women, and they work with women in Amazonia, and you can find them on the internet. And so I have a whole list of links to women's organization, and they themselves are connected with broader network. So they do organize, because many of them organize transnationally, not only on a regional level, let's say Brazil or Ecuador, but they organize also with groups outside of it. So they also connect with the internet. But this is one of the big issue of the time for men and for women. And I think is one of the big issue, because the internet connects us, but is built on the destruction of a huge amount of land and a huge amount of water. To make a computer, you have to move tons and tons of soil to extract the minerals. And you have to use huge amount of clean water. So this is one of the issues that we really have to confront, because we cannot think only about what we can do with the computers or the internet or the iPhones. We have to think about what it takes. For instance, the millions that have been killed in the Congo, are now more and more connected to the robbery of the minerals. The Congo is one of the richest parts of the world in terms of minerals. That's why it's being so martyred. That's why people are so poor. So that is really fundamental. I think that this is one of the issues that people have to confront. We cannot talk about what you can do with a computer without talking about what you need to do in order to have a computer.
Would you be willing to share that internet list with us?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in a little bit just because people are very excited. So yeah, Silvia, if you can share that list.
Yes.
And
yeah.
And David Schwartz person is dying to jump in here, and then Sam Friedman, I see your comment. Oh yes, freed person, we can say. Freed person.
Don't forget to.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
People can
Thank you, Silvia, for this is a really privilege to hear you speak. I first heard you in person at San Miguel de Allende, a meeting just a few years ago. And I've read your book, Caliban and the Witch, and Revolution at Zero Point, and so forth, which you were a contributor. I think what you have to contribute, what you are saying about the commons, is extremely important. Regarding, I was actually a participant in Venezuela just the end of October, the first Eco-Socialist International Convocation. And one of the important themes was, of course, how the struggle to preserve the commons was really a prefiguration of a pro-capitalist world.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's a key thing to understand, and how indigenous peoples around the world have so much to contribute to the materiality of a post-capitalist world, both social relations and modes of production like agroecology. I just wanted to hold up a book that I just got, Social Reproduction Theory. I went to a panel a year ago at the Historical Materialism Conference, Historical Materialism Conference, and heard the panel that contributed to this book. And I'm particularly interested in the contribution of, I'm probably not pronouncing her name right, but Tithi Bhattacharya.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And she speaks about the, where does the social reproduction of labor power occur? Not only in the home, but elsewhere as well. Citing, Lisa Vogel's work.
Yeah.
In healthcare system, in the public education, and so on. So what I would, my only point here is that the concept of class struggle in today's world has to be seen in many dimensions, and the reproduction of labor power, the valuation of labor power, is really, to me, this is something I've learned recently, on how that valuation is actually subject to the multi-dimensional class struggle. So I would like you to, give us your take on that, and also specifically the corporations that are involved in the enclosures of the commons, like in Africa. I would presume they also include Chinese corporations. I've saw a post about that. So please expand on that. I think it would be very helpful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you know, I absolutely agree. And my problem with you know, books like The Social Reproduction that you just mentioned, of some of the women, not about the child, just different, but some of the women, like, is that they have really pushed aside completely the work that we did. And they can go through pages and pages and pages of discussion of social reproduction, completely ignoring the work that the Campaign for Wages for Housework, that, you know, from 1972 to 77 and beyond, you did a huge amount of work on the whole issue. So yes, of course, we never denied that reproduction takes place in the schools, in the hospitals, on the country. I just published a book with Autonomia on the work that we did on the Campaign for Wages for Housework in Brooklyn, in New York, between 72 and 77. It's called the New York Wages for Housework Committee. But I guess because we spoke of wages for housework, that was the kiss of death. You know, nobody wants to be connected with housework. They all want to be connected with wages. Work outside the home, housework has become a bad term. You can, anyway, let me not get into a polemic with that, but I do have a bitter, but it's very important, and I'm very pleased that after many, many years in which the working woman was always talked about as the woman who worked in a factory or worked in an office, finally, after all this time, feminists are talking about reproduction. And, you know, of course, they're not talking about us who did that work for a long time, but I'm very happy. So yes, reproduction takes place in the home and outside the home. In fact, in one sense, you can say that everything is reproduced. So the person who's making a car is also doing reproduction work. But I think that what we brought out and what the feminist movement originally brought out, right, is that there is an area of life that has never been seen as connected with capitalist work and with capitalist accumulation, because it was outside of the wage system. So schooling, for instance, has always been considered part of the reproduction of capital. The schools and so on, the student movement, etc. Louise Althusser talked about schooling as part of, you know, the state and the hospital system. These were not areas that were ignored, but there was an area of life that was always ignored by the left as well as by the liberal economists, which was the home, which was sexuality, which was procreation, and all of that was seen as the private realm. I think that is the important issue about the discussion of reproduction. These other areas were never outside of the scope of the struggle. When people spoke of class struggle, they spoke about the whole area of wage work. I think that the difference was extending the notion of class struggle to areas that were considered completely outside of it, because they were considered part of the private also by the socialists. So I think that is the difference. So I'm very pleased that they are now interested in social reproduction. I think it's important, and definitely we should extend from the family outside, but not also lose the difference, because my fear is that, oh, now everything is social reproduction, so let's talk about the hospital. Why talk about the home? Let's talk about the hospital. Meanwhile, there's a lot of unpaid labor that is taking place in the home. There's a lot of invisibilized labor, and there's a lot of social relation and dynamics that I fear have been ignored again. Because particularly if you work in academia, hospitals, wage work, education are okay type. domestic work, it's not. And anyway, that's
Sylvia, I'm gonna jump in a little bit for time. Sam Friedman, I'm actually going to ask if we can hold on, because I feel like your question will sort of bring us home, and just wanted to give Anna and Jason an opportunity to jump in. And then Sam's question is, since this is about the future, the other world that is possible if we make it so, asked, you know, how let's see, he said, you know, well, Sam, I'm gonna let, he asked you to sort of see if you could talk about from the observations of where we are now, what can get us to the future that we need. So Sam, do you mind sort of articulating that kind of a little bit last and bringing us home with that? And we'll just let Anna and Jason, oh, and Dad, yeah, oh, and 10 minutes, yeah, okay, got you. Does that sound okay to everybody?
Sure.
Yes? Okay.
Whoa.
Okay. Anna, do you want to,
Sure.
what would you like to add or ask? Or?
I watched and I actually emailed to everyone a video by Silvia where she spoke on a similar subject on the Commons, and how social movements not only struggle against international companies, the states, or whatever, but also create communal, sort of communal living beyond the struggle that I think David said, like, can be seen as a prefiguration of how we'll organize in the future. And in the past 2 weeks, in preparation for this session on women, I've struggled with the question, well, so how will we organize the reproductive work? Because for me, it was not obvious. Well, having grown up in a nuclear family, to me, it was never obvious that there are other alternatives. And so I researched, and then interested in anthropology, I found examples from hunter-gathering societies, or some traditional societies in Latin America, that it can be done collectively. Nothing wrong with that, and it actually has a beneficial impact on children being raised collectively, having more than just a mother and father, but having an extended family, and having neighbors and other members of community who care for them, who consider them as their children, the children of the community, living not in isolation of a family house. And how it's not only beneficial for children, but for women, because others in the community, they also do their share of the work. Not only men, but other members contribute to raising children, all the children of the community. So yeah, and it's very fascinating. It's fascinating that there are social movements that try to implement active reproductive work while they're struggling, during their struggles. And I hope it will will last. I hope it will be resilient, and a resilient experiment that will not end when the struggle is ended, so that the people won't go home after the struggle is ended, as you said, like the landless movement of peasants.
Yeah, for instance, I've noticed, when you go back to the history of the labor movement in the United States, you always see this happening when the struggle gets serious. When the struggle gets to the point where it's a life and death struggle, we're not going to give up cost what may, then people completely socialize. They begin to pull their resources together. They begin to do things collectively. They begin to become like one family, and I think you can really see that through the history of the class struggle in the United States. And often maybe it doesn't last after the end of the struggle, also because often you have had a big backlash, etc., which changes the industry. But that impulse to come together, because that solidarity makes you stronger, and that putting your, but looking into the future, looking into a future society, to me, it's a society where not only you share everything, the work, and the wealth you produce, and the caring, the solidarity as principle of organization, but where also there's a change in the subjectivity, right? Where you begin to think of being in different ways, possessiveness, jealousy, all those things that to me are a product of scarcity, really a product of scarcity, the lack of self-valorization. You know, there are also things that will change or should change together with the creation of a society where yeah, people are not pauperized in all kinds of ways. Pauperized in terms of resources, but also pauperized in terms of their creative possibilities. You know, people are attacking consumerism today. The fact that people go out and shop, even if they don't have. But I think that's a product of poverty. You know, you are so, your own sense of value, your confidence in yourself is being so depleted that you turn to commodities, you know, as a form of empowerment. And I think that the overcoming of that depletion, of that pauperization, you know, it's also part of the transformation of a new human being. And I think that's extremely important.
Thank you.
And yeah, and you know, looking towards the future, I see a kind of a ideal future where, you know, all decisions, important decisions about people's life in the community are made communally, you know, and where you politicize. That's something that impressed me, like talking with some of the women in Argentina, in this villa of Argentina. I had the impression of women for whom all kinds of decisions about day-to-day life were politicized, because you were treading into new ground, you know, setting up a new space to give first aid to children, right? Tearing down a wall that prevented you communication with other parts of the community. You know, you had to decide it together, because it meant confronting the police. It meant to decide, what is the value of this to us? What is the value? What is the importance? What does it mean? And you decide it collectively. So your daily life, your reproduction is really politicized. And it's, you know, people are decided communally. And I think I wrote in a few places the way they also use theater to do political formation. Political formation is part of the everyday life, discussing the issues, using the theater of the oppressed to act out conflicts, to act out contradictions. All of that was a kind of life that was very rich, was poor from the point of view of consumption, but was actually very rich and creative, because you had to continuously think, make decisions, hear what other women were saying. You were never feeling like alone in your little casita, you know, but you were always like part of a rich conversation, you know? You were a part of a moving society. And that, to me, felt like a great wealth.
I love that. Sam Friedman next, and then we're gonna, since this is our last session of the semester, Richard's gonna have the last 10 minutes to kind of sum up our experiences and then maybe sort of next steps. So Sam,
yeah,
you are on.
While we've been talking, I've partly been thinking back to the experiences in the early 70s, where we were discussing many of the same things Silvia has been discussing, although obviously there have been many, many decades of additional both horrors and creativity since then. And I've been thinking about what I've always, well, not always, but recently been coming to think about an error Marx made, which was concentrating his time and effort so much on defining the dynamics of the system that he, you know, some of what he could have been doing didn't get done. You know, we all die at a certain point. Well, I want to think, you know, between kind of what Silvia just said about the kind of world we're trying to build, which, you know, got a lot of familiarity, both with what I also have observed in Argentina and other places, and a lot of what we've talked about all our lives when we had the moment to do it. Is there's a disjuncture that we have to get between to go from here to there. And as Silvia was talking and describing all the wonderful struggles that are going on, I kept thinking about the fact that, for example, in Argentina, those struggles have been defeated in many ways, although they still continue. That's true of everything, and that capital still has the capacity to destroy the world with its militaries. And in addition to that, is in the process, because of its own contradictions, of destroying the world through its pollutions of various kinds. And we're under a very tight timetable around that one. So my question to Silvia is, what does your analysis and observation contribute in terms of how we can make the leap that we better somehow make in order to keep the destruction from destroying everything?
Well, I would say this, you're absolutely right. And there's no guarantees that these struggles that people are making, and women in particular are making, and I've described, are going to defeat capitalism. I agree completely. But I don't see an alternative, because it seems to me that strengthening the relation among people, you know, overcoming the way they have decided us, building communities where people are seeing that my life is your life, that I have to move so you don't get destroyed, because in your destruction is my own death. That this is the only way, because certainly in order to fight capitalism, it's a long struggle that has many, many fronts. It has many, many fronts, right? There's a front where you fight, you know, with a mass demonstration. There's a front where you fight with the strike. And on the other hand, at the bottom of all struggle is the relation that people build with each other. Is the relation where people decide what kind of resistance you're capable of. And I think what kind of resistance you're capable of is very much dependent on the type of social tissue that is constructed around everyday reproduction. For example, there is now a big movement that is growing across the world of women against violence against women, that comes from Argentina, Ni Una Menos, that now is, you know, for last year, March 8th, this year, March 8th, they are going to be dedicated to violence, forms of resistance to violence against women. I think part of that process is to understand how they connect with capitalist accumulation, how they connect with the new forms. I think calling March 8th, you know, a day of resistance to violence against women and a strike is very important, but most important is the process of going there, you know, of understanding, making the maps, you know, how is this violence deployed, etc., etc. But at the end of it is the capacity of women to create societies and to create communities where people know each other, people connect with each other, people are able to defend each other and create something new. That to me, it's really an element, a fundamental element of every struggle. And I would say that one thing that comforts me is the experience of the Zapatista, that for all the militarization of Chiapas, which has been amazing, the violence, but also the other attack that the government has made, which has been to try to win people away from Zapatismo by putting a lot of money, the bolsas familiares, you know, all these little handouts, welfare handouts to women, right? And partly they've been successful because there have been a number of families who were with the Zapatista who have left because they were given money. On the other hand, we now have new generation, younger people who have grown into the Zapatismo. You know, we now have hundreds and hundreds and thousands of younger people who have grown with the communal spirit. And that to me is really very important because Zapatismo is not a small thing. You know, you're talking about at least like 200, 250,000 people, right? Who are living in communities. And that's very interesting to see those communities because, you know, you still have families, but you have a huge, huge communal life. Decision making, it's really, it's very interesting the way they're organized. Very, very interesting. And, you know, I like to believe that this, it's an embryo of what more and more, you know, people might be able to build, at least in places, you know, in the future. Yeah, I don't think there's any. I see the destructive power of capital, but we don't have the atomic bombs. We don't have, you know, their armies. But for instance, right, the question of communalism, working with the armies. Who are these armies? Who are these police? All over Latin America, they are indigenous people. They are people who come from the barrios. They really come from the lower level of society, who often are confronted with, do I, you know, face the state completely disempowered? Or, yeah, do I get a gun as a cop or a soldier or a narco? And they want to have some power. But I think that now women are beginning to deal with that. They're beginning to say, you know, these are not our enemies. So we have to talk about these people and realize they're our children. That they're taking away our children. And we have to find ways to talk to these children. We have to find some ways to, like in some Guatemaltecan women told me, they're beginning to take the name of the soldier, of the cops, when they go into their territories. And then they go to where their mothers are to say, this is what your son is doing to us. Yeah, yeah. Trying to basically deal with the families of the cops, because usually they bring them to another area, you know? And so not to look at those people as at the enemy, but thinking like, okay, this is a whole area where we need to work now. Recuperate this youth who now turns against this community because they feel so disempowered that they want to have a gun in their hand. They don't want to confront the state disarmed, you know? And yeah, so I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer.
No, I mean, that's perfect, Silvia. None of us have, and I think the whole point of this group is that there is no one answer. There are many answers, and Sam says that was great. Anyway, that's trying to imagine this whole time. So, Richard, why don't you?
Is my mic? My mic is off here.
No, it doesn't matter. We can hear you.
Don't do anything.
Okay. Well, Silvia, I just don't know how to thank you for what you presented and how you've helped us here today.
Oh, thanks to you.
Your discourse, it fits exactly into our program. And so I'm going to at once thank you and explain a little bit what we're doing. Everything. I want to thank you for two things. I've been as long as I've known you. And I think that you have made an important and perhaps singular contribution to the Marxist worldview in a century, which is precisely what you mentioned. Marx talks about social reproduction in the abstract, and it's very clear that capitalism can't function unless the working class is reproduced, because it's the source of value. But what you did is look at the reality, which is that women are the ones who do almost all of that work. In subsistence agriculture, in cooking, in caring for the sick, all of the caring things.
Right.
And
I only want to add that I've done a lot of the research and so on, but all my idea really comes from the movement, really comes from the women's movement. They're not coming from my head, you know, and then of course it's obvious, but I think it's important for me to say that.
Well, that's exactly what I was getting to next, because we think so much alike. Before the theory comes the practice, which
That's
is
right. That's right.
And the practice is that you've been an active feminist on the issue of pay for housework, and then in Africa and everywhere in the world, and even today, you have brought to us, who we thought we were researching this subject, but you brought to all of us things that we were unaware of, because of course they're suppressed in the media in 8 million ways. Saudi Arabia is praised by the New York Times.
Yeah.
And it's the
By the way, the Chinese, to answer your question, yes. And you know, I'm very sorry because some of the leftists feel like, oh, it's better to have the Chinese take over because they change. No, wrong. You know, when they take away your land and when they take, yes, then yeah. But I want to show you something before I go. Let me show you something. Hold on.
Sure.
There's nobody here but us two.
I don't know if it shows. Does it show?
Yeah.
Yes. Beautiful. And Silvia.
So that's a book I just published with the help of Arlene Austin, who had done a fantastic job of putting all our work on a book page.
Wow.
And he did other things too. And so it's a story about our. It has a lot of picture documents, all our discussion around reproduction in the 70s, and the struggle that we made around all kinds of issues, whether it is healthcare, sexuality, housework, and so on. So I hope you'll look at it, because it's really, I think, a very, very good book. You know, it's a book that is a collective project. No, it's not my book, but yeah.
So to return to collective project, another woman who has made real contributions to theory is Raya Dunayevskaya, whom I learned a lot from in my youth, and who believed in the movement from practice to theory. And that's, I believe that those are the two things: deep involvement and broad knowledge of what Marx called the real movement, and then the ability to theorize it. And as your disciple, I came up, when I formed this collective, with the subject of women as vanguard, which said you were uncomfortable with, because the word vanguard has gotten a bad name, because pseudo-Leninist parties have made it into the party to lead, the intellectuals to lead, hierarchical, pyramidal organization. But my formula was ironic and truthful, because fact, the movement is from practice to theory,
Mhm.
are the majority. And in fact, in the history of revolutions, the French Revolution of 1789 was moved forward when the women marched on Versailles and grabbed the king and queen and dragged them back to Paris, where the common people could keep their eyes on them.
Mhm.
But the women were robbed of their citizenship and of their participation by the Jacobins, whom all of these intellectual vanguardists praise, but they in fact totally disempowered the women and lost the revolution. The Paris Commune of 1871, again, it was the women who started. They were the ones who got up early enough in the morning to see that the right-wing generals were in the process of taking away the people's cannons that they had forged out of their own money in order to defend themselves. And the attack to crush Paris had already begun, and the men were sleeping, and the women went out, and they used their penknives to cut the traces on the horses so that the horses couldn't pull the cannons away, and then they woke up the men who came out, and so on. And in every stage of revolution, I lived through the Algerian Revolution as a student in France, and the women played a very important and powerful role. And as soon as the FLN took power, they moved them away and repressed them and so on and so forth, so that the next thing that happened was Islamism. So the reason I chose women as vanguard was to say, if they're the majority, if they do most of the work, both waged and unwaged, that they are clearly the leaders. And it's interesting because you were uncomfortable with the word, but in your talk, you used the word women in the forefront.
Yeah.
Women leading. All the synonyms for vanguard, except the word vanguard. Now, something that we try to do here, and Lola is our leader in that, is to change the vocabulary, to get rid of poison words. For instance, like the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Right.
All that meant was that the majority should rule. But the word dictatorship is a no-no.
Yeah.
I almost accidentally, in our first posting on the subject of capitalism, and it was supposed to be the future, which is a different society, the words caring and sharing came out of my head. My writing took the form of a graduation talk of a teacher to the graduates who were going out in the world. And it said, just as you learned in kindergarten, caring and sharing, those are the basic principles of our new society that you're going out into. And I noticed that those were exactly the two main concepts. So I'm totally with you that we need to reappropriate these concepts and particularly use very simple kindergarten expressions so that people know very, very well what we want and we stand for, and don't confuse us with state socialism or all other kinds. Now, as we finish this session, this is our first semester of this amazing, amazing project, which came together very rapidly and is entirely improvised. And so we've gotten as far as we've gotten in a short 3 months, correct? 3 months and a week. And I think that we have something that is worthwhile, because people must have an idea that a better world is possible, even if the chances, it's a strong fight, but that it is possible, and some sense of what it looks like. The history is that people have made revolution again and again and again, and particularly with women in the forefront, the vanguard, if you will, and that the women have always been pushed aside by new hierarchical, male-dominated societies. So clearly, any vision of a new society would have to be a vision of a society where women were the majority, where women were in charge, basically. And this is what you see
Where there is
happening.
no in charge.
Well, and there is no in charge. Very good. Thank you. Certainly not repressed. And so far, this has not happened, which is why I stress the idea of Vanguard. Now, our method here, as it's developed fairly spontaneously, is that all the information that we gather in, we classify in 3 categories. Then, the bad things that were happening in 2017, where it looked like, as you pointed out, the world was close to the tipping point of atomic war and ecological disaster and social disintegration. And then the other end, the now, in which we try to depict a society of caring and sharing, where there is enough for all. And people like David, who have the idea of solar communism, point out that the idea of scarcity is really irrelevant when people work together and we eliminate armies and waste and all the rest of it. The in-between part, which makes our utopian project different from those that I've ever heard of, is the how. When, then, now, and how. How are we going to get there? Now, this again has been a little bit of coming of one of my brainchild's children, is that instead of using words like revolution, which are scary and which have so many bad connotations like Vanguard, I've adopted the phrase emergence. And what I see happening in your speech, it was just an example of that, is women power emerging from below, and self-organization, which is, scientifically speaking, the definition of emergence. It's part of chaos theory. It's part of the theory of multiplicity and complexity. And so emergence is what is happening. And our method is fairly simple. It consists of plagiarism. I intend over the next weeks to take what you said, which Anna wrote down, and change all the tenses so that the movements that you describe, which you see as embryos, are something that we're looking at from a century from now. And back. And what we say in the part that says how is that all of these things continue to develop and grow stronger. We just translate what you said about the present into the past and then let it develop as embryos must develop.
Good. Excellent.
And so this is it. And we hope that if this project continues, and so we see what you describe as emerging, and
You see it is realized.
with emerging movements of labor, of other oppressed peoples, and so on, so that this becomes the bridge between then and now. And hopefully would be interesting enough and maybe imaginative enough and funny enough so that people will actually read it. And in fact, our latest idea is to send periodically to the internet and to magazines that are friendly to us, reports from the future.
Good.
So I've written one, which I invite you to read, called Out Your Pig, in which we see how this movement could possibly grow by a huge movement from below of low-waged women workers and women home workers, and the whole thing developing on March 8th into a giant movement against violence against women.
Good.
So we're trying to tease out all of the possibilities that could get us from here to there.
And I added this morning at like 9:45. So I'm sure nobody had a chance to read it. Just a tiny, like a start of something based on the City of Joy, founded in part by Eve Ensler. So looking at American refugees, environmental refugees. We have now a class of environmental refugees coming together and kind of modeling their own cities of joy. The First Nations invite them in, and then apply for independence at the United Nations. Some of them compete in the Olympics under the Olympic flag as other refugees. And so this sort of spirals in like just the embarrassment first of the Trump administration and their inability to respond to any of these crises, and then eventually it becomes clear that it's the inability of capitalism to respond to any of these crises. And so that's part of my strand that got on this morning at the last minute.
That's wonderful. Well,
Okay.
we're almost at the end. We've got like 4 minutes left. So I just wanted to look ahead at the future of this project, which is we will reconvene. My official title here is the convener. So we will reconvene by mutual consent and vote of the masses here. We will reconvene our project at the same time on Sunday, January 7th. And the title, I think the topic that we were going to look at was violence and nonviolence as a method of struggle. And that's a very, very big one. And I invite you to join us anytime that you are free.
Thank you very much. Thank
It's
you.
very simple. You didn't have to leave your house. Jenny talked about participating in pajamas.
So you talk about that, and then you take it.
You said it and I talked about it.
Okay. Very good.
In any case, we'll be there. And between now and then, what we want to do is more writing, it seems to me. We've filled our Dropbox and with different articles, including things that you wrote, and what we've had in these sessions, and to do just what Jenny did this morning at 9:45, and it's actually easy and fun, which is transform struggles that are promising into fantasies about what if they developed, what if other struggles joined together with them, so that we get a planetary emergence, caring and sharing.
Sorry.
And that we overwhelm capitalism by the swarm and by positiveness and by building alternative communities and alternative societies, because capitalism is collapsing all by itself. And that's perfectly obvious. As Emanuel Wallerstein points out, capitalism, after 500 years of total hegemony, has recently become more and more chaotic. There is no central thing. Neoliberalism has given way, and globalism, to a regression, to debt servitude and all kinds of other things, including the enslavements that you've been talking about. And in a period of chaos, you get bifurcation. We're either going back to something totally barbarous or forward to something positive. And in times of instability, chaos, and bifurcation, human agency, the agency of a bunch of people online trying to imagine a better future, the agency of groups of women, and I had no idea that they were in the thousands in all of these different places, who seemingly are doing just ordinary things of food and so on, but in fact are building the solid base of a better world, which then becomes possible. So
I need to go. I need to go now because I have people waiting for me. I'm sorry to interrupt this, but I really need to go.
Thank you for coming. We
Thanks,
love you.
Sylvia.
Thank you. See you both. And, you know, it's been great. And definitely let's keep in touch. And yes, and all the best, you know, to all us all for the new year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Fred's going to give us later today the URL of this meeting, and I suggest that we send it out to all of our friends to say
Very good.
it's happening and that they should join, because we need not just a dozen writers, we need a bigger group. With
Very
more.
good. Very
Goodbye,
good.
Sylvia.
Love to you all.
In January.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Are we done? Say goodbye.
So just to reiterate, because some folks were asking, we're reconvening Sunday, January 7th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Yes.
And
that's when we'll see you again.
happy holidays, everybody. If you
We don't know
celebrate,
how to turn these things. We're like the Wizard of Oz. He says, I don't know how the thing works.
I do. Bye-bye.